Hello lovelies. Today we're going to talk about odds or chances and the psychology thereof. Now I know the odds part itself, the mathematics, is a bit boring, but once this little bit is out of the way and reiterated for this video, I'm going to talk more about the psychological side of it and how that might affect your games, so stick with me. It's come up in a lot of videos recently, particularly with reference to the Year Zero engine and its extremely long odds of success. So it struck me that probably we need to talk about it more, not just in pure mathematical terms, but in terms of psychology. Consider the humble six-sided dice, or D6. Let's say that we need to roll at least 1 6 to succeed on a task. So how many dice do you think that we need to roll in order to all but guarantee success? Is it 6 dice? We might intuit that since we have a 1 in 6 chance on 1 dice to start with, and 6/6 equals 1 whole. However, that's not the case. To have an almost certain chance of rolling a 6 on 6-sided dice, we'd need to roll around 38 dice. You can never get to 100%, that's about 99.9%, but 38 dice is the number you'd need to roll. And that doesn't sound particularly practical at the table for us to have an absolute chance of success on something. So what about a different benchmark? Say 95%. 95% is considered, broadly speaking, an acceptable success rate at most professional tasks that you might undertake, or a 5% failure rate if you prefer, which neatly ties in with D20 games where you have a 5% chance of botching. When you go to the cafe and you get a cup of coffee from a moderately experienced barista of average capability, you should be able to get exactly what you're after 95% of the time with no mistakes or issues. To achieve that level of success, we would, quote only, unquote, need to roll about 17 dice. Still too many, but a lot more manageable than rolling 38 of them. So that gives us some sort of idea of the weird mathematics around the chances and the odds, and that's the benchmark that I've arrived at. An average person of average practiced skill at a task, in the right environment and situation with the right equipment, should have around a 95% chance of success. But that's just the mathematics, and I've talked about that a fair bit lately. Chance, odds, gambling, they're not just about the mathematics, there's also psychology and intuition, as there was in thinking, as many people do, that 66 is enough. When we sit down to play a TTRPG, whether it's rolling to attack or checking for success on a skill, we're constantly interacting with probabilities and odds, which people tend to have a not particularly good intuitive grasp on. These dice rolls, though simple at first glance, tap into some fascinating psychological factors around risk, chance and decision making that have been fairly extensively studied, albeit more in the frame of gambling or insurance rather than in slaying imaginary goblins. Let's dive into the psychology of probability in tabletop games, how players interpret risk or are likely to interpret risk, and how it might affect their choices at the table. Let's start with what we'll call achievable odds. These are the rolls that sit between 70 and 80%, a comfort zone for most players. It's the sweet spot where success feels very likely, but is not absolutely guaranteed. From a psychological perspective, this range feels like a good, solid bet, and most players will happily chance their arm on such a probability. When we encounter these odds in our games, we feel confident. It's enough to make us think we've got the upper hand in the situation and that we can do whatever it is that we're trying to do. But there's still just a little teeny weeny bit of tension, just enough to keep things interesting, not an overwhelming sense of success. This feeling of control is key. It's why, for example, when a character has, say, a 75% chance of succeeding on an attack, players are far more willing to take bold actions and to strike out, rather than feeling hesitant or that they need to tap into clever tactics or limited resources such as spells, luck points, the ability to push rolls, etc. On the flip side, there is the favourable but risky odds range, and that sits around 50 to 60%. Here we're teetering on the edge of a coin flip. The risk is palpable, but the odds still feel at least somewhat reasonable. Some might hesitate, while others, especially those who enjoy the thrill of uncertainty, will leap into action and quite possibly doom themselves, but at least it won't feel unfair. At this point, it's not just about what the dice say, but about what kind of player you are. Risk takers, those who thrive on the excitement of a close call, are more likely to engage. They might even feel more invested, because that 50-50 chance has the potential to swing either way, creating that edge of the seat moment while you wait for the outcome. Despite still having good odds of success, mathematically speaking, it still feels perhaps riskier than it actually is. But what happens when the odds get longer, say a 30% chance of success or less? At this point, in real life and in gambling, typically most people check out. The risk feels too high for the expected level of reward, and unless that reward is bigger, they'll avoid it. This is where some fascinating psychology comes into play. There's something called the gambler's fallacy, where even where the odds are slim, some people will still think, maybe this is my lucky break, maybe this is my time, especially, and this is particularly fallacious, after they've had a string of bad luck. They hope that against the odds, things will correct themselves, that they're due a success, even if they don't truly expect to succeed. It's this balancing act between hope and rationality that can drive some of the most thrilling moments in games and cause people to lose the shirt off their backs. It also leads to a lot of lost characters and total party kills. Even this isn't the full story though. Things are further complicated by more psychological issues, which can be quite individualistic. Let's break down some of the psychological biases that mess with our ability to judge risk accurately. For one, there's something called optimism bias. Even when the odds are stacked against them, some players just assume that they are luckier than everybody else at the table, and hell, it can seem like some of them are. That's optimism bias in action, or cheating. It's the same reason why someone might keep trying to land that improbable strike or that kooky plan, despite the odds being completely stacked against them. Another bias is loss aversion. Some people feel the sting of failure more intensely and acutely than the satisfaction of success. In a tabletop context, this means players might hesitate to take a 60 to 70% chance, even though those odds are pretty good. Why? Because they're more worried about potential failure than excited by the likely success. They might need a little more potential reward to nudge them to the point of taking action. And then there's the matter of how people perceive probabilities. Weirdly, people tend to overestimate the likelihood of rare events. In TTRPGs, that means when something has a 5% chance to happen, players often treat it like it's way more likely to happen, like 20 or 25%. That's why critical hits or rare high-stakes events often feel like they happen more often than they really do. When they do happen, they're often more psychologically impactful, emotionally impactful, and more meaningful to the game than all the normal rolls you've been doing. You remember them better, and thus judge them to happen more often than all the mundane normal rolls that you make that aren't remarkable, and that biases our memory towards them, the same way that this can happen in the opposite direction. You remember that one time you found a slug in a bottle of milk, and that might put you off milk forever, even though it was a 1 in a million shot and you consumed thousands upon thousands of bottles of milk before then. On the other hand, we underestimate high probabilities. A 95% chance of success might still feel risky because we zero in on that 5% chance of failure. That's why even rolls with overwhelmingly good odds can still make players nervous. Many people are extremely risk averse or made extremely anxious by even remote chances of failure. There's also the ambiguity effect. When we don't know the exact odds, we get a lot more cautious. In a game, this happens when the games master says, well, it's a low chance, but you could try, without providing any sort of concrete number. Players assume the worst, which makes them far more hesitant to take risks and try things. It's why clarity in the dice system, or lack of clarity, matters. Specific numbers help players make more informed decisions, and they're more likely to take calculated risks than uncalculated ones. Hidden difficulties might be a good design choice for a genre like horror, while more open difficulties might better suit heroic or cinematic games where people need to know the odds and can devote resources to it. Then again, as Pratchett said, 1,000,000-to-1 shots happen 9 times out of 10. Of course, not everyone interprets risk in the same way, which makes all of this a bit of a crapshoot when it comes to game design. No individual or group will have the same psychological risk profile. Some people favour certainty so much that they'll choose a 90% chance over an 80% chance, even when the reward for the lower chance might be much better. That's a certainty bias, the human tendency to prefer what feels like a sure thing, even if it means missing out on bigger rewards. So next time you're sitting around the table, or thinking about your own game designs, consider how these psychological biases might be influencing the decisions that you and your players make. Whether it's taking a safe bet, risking it all on a coin flip, or hoping for that long shot critical hit that will change the fate of the world. Dice rolls are more than just random chance. They're a mirror of how we perceive risk, reward, and the thrill of the unknown. There's nothing hard and fast here, but it is, at least, something to keep in mind during the process of creating or running a game. And from a player's point of view, being aware of your own psychology around risk and chance can help you make more rational in-game decisions for your character and play the odds. Thanks for watching. If you found this dive into RPG dice systems and human psychology interesting, reward my behaviour with a like, subscribe, and click that little bell and turn on notifications if you want to very slightly increase the odds that YouTube will actually tell you when there's more videos. Sub to my Patreon for another means to see when new material pops up and to interact with me directly, suggest more topics, etc., and get priority. You also get to help a starving artist who makes games for precious little reward. If you already subbed to my Patreon via Apple, please go there and change your means of support, because Apple abruptly decided to take 30% of payments made through their payment system. The bastards. Zang.
In his house in Relier, great Cthulhu lies dreaming, and when he awakens, he shall have the morning wood of aeons. Call of Cthulhu is a deeply pornographic card game. Enjoy your tentacles.